Welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff Podcast. It's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu. And geez, I love to talk about bonsai if you haven't picked it up by now. All right, this episode of the podcast, I want to make it informative, interesting, and hopefully something that that you can work on for yourself, something you can get out of it. And I want to start with talking about care guides and where they need to be used in the correct method. They are always generated with the best of intention from everybody, but I just think there needs to be a little bit of caution taken by everybody. So it's timely because I've talked about them a little bit lately, and I thought that'd be a great topic for the podcast. I want to talk also about the concept of framing in design and how we can use it with our bonsai. And the last thing, and probably the most important thing I want to talk about, is one of the hardest tasks to master with bonsai. The one thing that is the true difference between those of us that are average at bonsai to those of us that are elite, and it's got to do with patience, which I'll delve into a little bit later on too. So stick around, as always. Should be an informative listen, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you for giving me your time. I really appreciate it. Stick around. So first up, care guides. Care guides, everyone's used them. I definitely loved them. When I first started, I thought they were a godsend because it was a cheat sheet. It was the answers that you were looking for when you needed them. Okay, what's the species? What time of the year is it? What do I do? Just tell me. Just make it as easy as you possibly can. And I was having this conversation the other day in one of the intensives about it, with someone that was really well-meaning, that was going to take some of the information and add them to their club care guides, which is great. And I said, no problems. You're welcome to use any information that I can provide, because where it's useful, please make the most of it. You know, stand on top of the tallest building and shout it to your heart's content. But there's also a point that I was saying that, and I thoroughly believe that these things need to have an asterisk or a big, let's say it's a website you're going into, a big massive button that says, before you can enter, please use with caution. There's a number of parameters that need to be taken into consideration before you follow these simple guidelines. It's just not always that easy. I've talked a lot before in the podcast, and my approach is a solid health assessment of your bonsai, and a strength assessment before you do absolutely anything with them. And I think that should be written in conjunction with these care guides. For instance, let's take something which is timely for us. Again, I'm in Melbourne, I'm in Australia, and we're sort of mid-November-ish, and we're heading towards decandling season for pines, which starts for me early December. And if we just turned around and said, okay, so the magic date for decandling your pines as per a care guide is this date in the future. And you got to that point, which I'm telling you I used to do, and I'm sure almost everybody listening to this, the podcast, would have at some point or another picked up a piece of paper or read something and said, yep, that's the time for it, go for it. And you decandle a black pine that's weak, that maybe hasn't been fed properly, that hasn't got all the other things that need to go into making your pine as strong as it possibly could be. It's not in a very sunny position. It hasn't been repotted for a very long time, or if it's in really poor soil, the tree's struggling left, right and centre. And then you go around, look at this care guide, and it says decandle this date. You go, yep, no worries, I'm going to cut off absolutely everything on this tree that's grown from spring and go back to a base. And then all of a sudden, after decandling, nothing happens and the tree starts getting weaker and weaker, and eventually, does the worst thing it possibly can do and dies. Then you're simply looking at it and you'll be going, well, I did everything I should have. I followed the care guide. Well, the care guide said decandle this date, I decandle that date. It's got to be written into it that there's got to be some kind of proviso to ensure that you're doing the right thing at the right time for your tree based on a certain parameters, certain requirements, certain conditions that come into it. And that's why I do love the idea of the care guides, and I think that they're great. But really it's, and they're always done with good intentions, but you've got to factor in that there's microclimates that play into this as well. So, I write a care guide for me where I'm based in southeast Melbourne. Is that the same for someone who lives, near the border of Victoria where the weather's a lot hotter and a lot drier, or does it apply to someone who lives up in the hills, the local hills here, where it's a lot cooler and damper? And do they apply? Like, is it applicable what we talk about? And it comes down to so much to do with our bonsai. The soil that we use, the watering frequency, all that sort of stuff. That's the magic bullet. Tell me how many times a day to water my trees. Well, that depends on so much. There's so much around that whole sentence that you cannot. It's different for me. It's different for you. It's different for the person sitting next to you. It's different for all of us, and that's why it's one of the mastering it is almost impossible. And when you think you've mastered it, a variable changes slightly, and it's all out the window. You've got to start all over again. So, I think you need to, with the care guides. My approach is look at them as a general guide. Like it's, okay, so, we decandle pines as it comes into an early summer period, or a period that allows for a certain amount of growth to occur after that until they go dormant again. So therefore, if you're in a climate where your summers aren't as intense and you've got, you come into dormancy a lot quicker, then you'll need to be decandling a lot earlier, because understanding the process of decandling and that second flush generation and activation of those dormant buds, it needs to happen at a time to ensure that you're going to get the result that you want and have the time to do it. And that's where I think that, you can look at these things and these guides and accumulate them, put them, into your nightly reading as you jump into bed and you're buzzing about bonsai and you want to keep learning and learning and learning. Yeah, by all means, have a look and see when, your beech should be pinched, or, when you repot a ficus or whatever it is, or when you defoliate a maple, or how you defoliate a maple. That's cool. But I strongly encourage you that you take it with a grain of salt and you build it into your own environment, and you factor in so much more than just the physical task of what we do with bonsai. And don't ever assume because you've seen someone do it on YouTube, or because you've heard, someone stupid like me on a podcast say, hey, now's the time you should do this, because it's always done with good intention, and it's definitely done with love and not malice. But it's the thing that you need to do your own assessment and have a look at your tree and say, okay, so now's the time that I defoliate my ficus to get a second flush of growth based on me being near where the person that's giving this advice lives, around that sort of parameter, and say, yep, okay, that looks pretty good to me. All right, so now health assessment. And if you're stuck, if you're not sure, then err on the side of caution always, and reach out. I've talked about your bonsai network so many times that it's so solid. That times like this is when you need to turn around to people and your mates and say, "Hey, listen, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think?" Or reach out to someone like me, an email or a text, and say, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing this. Here's where I'm based. It's about the right time for it. What do you think about this tree? I've got a few doubts about it." And just get someone else to cast their eye over it that does this sort of thing, to say, yeah, it's a great idea, or no, you know what, probably hold off, or maybe just this part and not that part. That's what I think your network is so solid for, that you can lean on it and be prepared that when people ask you, that you have to make that assessment as well. Build up your confidence and your availability for these people to be the one that they can turn to say, okay, yeah, well, looking at and sometimes make the hard call and say, I don't know, I don't think it. I wouldn't do this at that stage because it looks like there's something not right with it. Or if in doubt, hey, why don't you reach out and ask someone else? Is there someone else around your area? Is there a local bonsai nursery? Is there someone that you trust at the bonsai club? Is there someone that in the bonsai space that you can reach out to and lean on? Because care guides, like I said, they're always done with love in their heart, and it's trying to help everybody. But there's so many other parameters that go into them that I just think that to allow you to use them and to allow you to develop and grow as a bonsai practitioner, you need to take it as, okay, well, this is what should be happening, but let's have a look. Let's do an assessment. Let's really make sure this is the right thing for me. And, does it make sense? Think about the repercussions of whatever it is you're going to do. All right, so if I go and I defoliate this now, what does that mean? All right, so it's got to do a second flush of growth. And so the second flush of growth has got to grow, and then I've got to try and get it to harden off before we get to the intensity of summer. Am I going to have time to do that? Is it something that I can do? It's not always easy, but it's what you have to do if you want to take that next step in bonsai. Don't just blindly follow things because they're in writing, or question it and factor it into your environment and your climate and how you do things with your trees. Sorry for the interruption, and I really hope you're enjoying the podcast as much as I'm enjoying making it. Makes the bonsai world feel a little bit smaller and a lot more cozy. Anyway, I'd love for you to become a supporter of the podcast by subscribing for as little as $3 a month. This support will go directly towards the cost of producing this podcast, and it's entirely optional. The link to become a supporter is in the episode notes for each edition. Now that's over, let's get into the podcast. Right, so quickly now I want to just talk about the concept of framing and how we can use it with bonsai. So framing it's keeping the viewer's focus on the framed object. And you see it a lot with photography, a hell of a lot with photography, where those photos that you love, where you find that your eye gets drawn to the outside of something and then it keeps getting pulled back into the middle. And, when I was researching this for the podcast and looking at different things, one picture which really stuck out in my head was there's sort of like mountains left and right, sort of scooping up to the left, and in the middle there's a lake, and someone's sitting right near that lake in the middle of the frame, down the sort of the bottom third of the picture for reference. And every time I sort of looked up to the side mountains, I was drawn back into that lake straight away, and then I was drawn to the person, and my eyes kept doing it over and over and over. And I thought it's a really cool concept that you can frame something and build a picture around it with our bonsai, but then still keep the focus coming back in to the centralized core of what it is that you want the viewer to be drawn into. And don't forget this, this links with other concepts that we've talked about before, negative space and all that sort of thing, where you sort of have hollows or nothing filled in a certain area to draw the attention back in there, and framing your structure of your tree around it, like the outside periphery of the tree and the silhouette that you're creating, and then very clearly and defining it, that you're having that negative space to draw someone in, and framing that negative space. So it's a key branch zipping off to the side of a nice gnarly little trunk, and then sort of above that key branch, I love to use it where I've got the negative space in there and I've got the silhouette of the tree all around it. So as you look at a photo of a tree, and maybe this is something you can do when you're jumping around online, tearing through social media at a million miles an hour, is have a look at some trees, and where you get stuck and drawn into one, look at those things and think about framing as one of those concepts where you use the silhouette of the tree or the trunk line itself and key areas of that tree, incorporating the use of negative space, so nothingness, to draw you back in as a viewer. And you'll find that your eye does, or your mind does, this loop where it sort of follows the base of the tree, frames around the outside of it, gets to the apex and sort of drops back down to that negative space. And you'll find it constantly does this loop where you're drawn back in again over and over and over. And I find for me it happens when I zip through looking at old exhibition books from overseas. And you flick from page to page to page, and all of a sudden something jumps out, and there's one that sticks in my head very clearly. It's this, it's a maple forest, a trident maple forest, where there's this real, not just a straight cut through between the trunks in the sort of off-centre part of the forest setting, but it's where the foliage goes up and then over to the left, and there's that gap following up and over to the left. So it makes the negative space makes this up and arrowed out to the left-hand side gap between the sections of the forest. And I love it because it draws me in every time. So, from a viewing perspective, I zip around the outside, I hit this middle part of the tree, and I just go, wow, and I'm drawn into the tree. And I find that every time I look around the periphery of it, I straight away get drawn back into this negative space of the tree. And the framing concept of it, where you are visually drawn into something, I think is really strong. And for me, it's I don't want to go on about it too much, but I think that if you can incorporate framing of your design through the silhouette around negative space, use of key branches and opening areas up, and try and get the viewer, a non-bonsai lover viewer, to get stuck in that moment and sort of trapped almost where they keep circling around, I reckon that's when you've got it right. And from your own perspective, when you have a look around through, online, or you're at shows or whatever like that, have a look at that as well and see where, stop at those trees that you do get drawn into and think about what part it is. Take a photo of it and study it and have a look at it, and don't replicate it, but that feeling, that emotion, or that process that you go through where you're drawn back in again over and over and over through the framing, the outside content drawing you back into some part of the design of the bonsai. I think it's really important, that visual element that you're drawn into based on how all the stuff around it, the fluff around the outside, draws you back in, and it's key to good bonsai. Right, so the word bonsai, comes back to a lot of us that are of that age, the Karate Kid movies, and the little junipers that he deals with, that I thought they were brilliant. When I first saw it, I went, oh my God, how good is Mr. Miyagi? How good are his bonsai? And then you sort of, you develop, and then you go back and watch it so many years later and think, yeah, they're not that good, and the way that they prune and everything they do. Anyway, it makes me laugh. But I'm swinging it around to what I talk about in the podcast. And there's one part where Mr. Miyagi says, "Patience, Daniel-san," and I think that patience is the best virtue or the best skill that we can hone and develop when it comes to our bonsai, and it's possibly one of the hardest things to master. And the difference between good bonsai and brilliant bonsai is patience in so many of its different forms. But I want to talk about allowing your design intentions to reach their potential, by allowing what your original focus was, your original desire, your original application of technique onto the bonsai, allowing that to do what it's going to do so you can see the result of it that you originally aimed for. All right? That's where patience comes in, and that's where it's really hard because, you've got branch cutters, you've got wire cutters, you've got your scissors, you've got, all sorts of things. You've got your steel bars, you've got your raffia, you've got your tape, you've got time up your sleeve, and it's like, you know what? That could be better, that tree. I'm going to bring it in, I'm going to belt it. I'm going to give it another, instead of twisting all the way to the left, it's going to twist now to the right. I reckon that'll look better. That trunk looks great like this. Imagine if I kick this branch around here and I did this and I did that, and I can tell you one or two things is going to happen. You're going to end up with a tree that's stuck permanently in first gear, or you're going to end up with a tree that's dead. And either way, it's going to be something that you are never going to be fully satisfied with. The process of doing the work, the process of undertaking those tasks, yeah, that's enjoyable. Oh, we all love it. Oh, nothing I love better than major bending on something. I can tell you that floats my boat. But when my greatest satisfaction comes when I know that I've done something, and suddenly it's been 2 years, and I go, now it's there. Now I can start taking the next step with that tree. That one that I got and I raffied and I bent the trunk and I dropped this branch and I did this and I tore this and I tore that. And, I put in place a certain feeding regime that would encourage strong growth, and I allowed that growth to push out to get strong roots to build the engine of the tree. And then I came back and I started working on it, and it's starting to ramify, it's getting better. And the following year I did this when it came to defoliation. I didn't, do it all over. I did this part of the tree and I let this part run out and I did whatever it is. And so then suddenly 2 years later, go through a couple of cycles, come around and go, you know what, I'm so happy with that tree now. One of the tricks that I use to getting it is, please don't tell anyone in my family, but having enough trees. Once you've got that volume of bonsai, and please don't use me as an excuse to go and get more trees. You don't need me as an excuse. Go and get them if you want them. But if you've got enough trees in your collection, you'll find that you are forced to leave things alone. And when you've done things, you let them sit. It's when you've only got a couple or not enough in your collection, and enough's not up to me, that's up to you to work out. But when you've got enough, haven't got enough in your collection, you cycle back through and you probably sit there and look at them a little bit more, and that can be really hard. I also have a big yard where I can take trees that I've done things to, or that I've applied technique to, that require patience to be the next step that I apply. I can put them in an area of my yard where I go, you know what, have a year here. Like, seriously, I'll still love you, I'll still water you, I'll still feed you, you get plenty of sunlight, but you're not in my immediate vicinity, and I'm not going to be looking at you every single minute of every day, where I'm going to go, you know what, I could fix, I could change, I could nibble, I could rebend this, I could wire secondaries, I could wire tertiaries, I could make this perfect quicker. It's like, you know what, I know this tree just needs time. I know it just needs to build up its resources. I know I need to let my design intent reach its potential before I stuff around with it again, because I'm telling you, you'll end up with a Frankenstein's mess if you keep mucking around with it, and you'll, more than likely go back to your original one, but you've lost 3-4 years plus all the branches that have died off as a result of being bent this way, bent that way, bent this way, bent that way. And, patience, I think, it's really hard. But if you think of your tree, as I said before, constantly being stuck in first gear, never going anywhere, treading water, then that for me is a reminder, because I've done it. I've been there. I've worked on trees and reworked on trees and reworked them again and done this and done that and listened to different people. Oh, do this, no, do that, no, do this, no, do that. It's like, which one do I do? So you try and please everybody because they all must be right, because they've been geniuses, because they've done bonsai for 465 years, so I should listen to them. But ultimately it comes down to you. And if you've gone through a process with something, or you've seen, or something's happened to that tree, then I strongly encourage you just to sit back, put your feet up, enjoy the ride. You want to work on another tree, cool, buy another tree, or pick something else which hasn't been worked on. Allow your trees to reach their potential, because I see it far too often where, and I hear it, I've done this, but I'm not sure. Yeah, okay, well, it's been 3 months. Yeah, but if I did this could be different. You're looking at your trees too closely. You just need a bit of a gap in you and your trees, and get that time frame in between there, because, as I said, your design potential will never reach what it should be. Secondly, the tree needs a break. You can't keep doing major stuff to your tree every couple of months. Like, you'll flog it, you'll kill it. Nothing's that strong. So when you come to me in another couple of months' time and say, oh, I've got all these pests all over my trees. Oh, this branch has gone brown. Oh, I've got this fungal issue on my new growth. It's like, okay. These things happen when trees get weak. How do they get weak? Just by being pestered constantly, not being left alone to do what they've got to do. So you've got to draw a breath. All right, you've got to make sure that you allow things to reach their potential. I've got this one tree, right? And I'm not going to talk about radiata pines again. It seems to have been a common thread lately, so I'm not going to bang on about them. It's just that it happens to be a radiata, so I'm not going to talk about radiatas. It's just that this one happens to be a radiata, right? And I originally bought this tree a long time ago, and it was a little whip, and I wanted to make it. I've talked about it before, where not that long ago, where it's a literati style, and reworked it. But, one branch that removed from the back of the tree that turned into a big gin branch had been grown and developed for years. years and years and years growing branches, wiring, shaping, candle cutting, getting buds, needle plucking, bud selection, repeat, go and do it all over again and again and again, just so I could build the structure on this branch with the full intent knowing that it was going to come off so it could be turned into a gin. Now, that's patience, because the tree would have looked great a long time ago having that thing cut off, but it looks even better now because I had the patience to just leave it alone and continue with my design intent. My design intent was, keep having the branches go this way. These are my keepers, but this one here, I want to make it look that's a branch that's died off over time, but the weight of the tree, the movement, the flow, the direction is all on the other side, but this one's going the wrong way. I want to have it as a significant gin. And to get a significant gin, you've got to allow it to grow. Like you have sacrifice branches on your trees, your junipers, and you can grow them, forever and a day, but you go and look at the great bonsai that if they've got really good deadwood, and you look at the thickness of that deadwood that they've got that's been removed, that doesn't happen overnight. That's years. That can be decades of developing growth on a tree with the intent to one day remove it, strip the bark, and make it into a gin, make it into deadwood. And that to me takes so much commitment and skill, and that's where the magnificent really rise above the cream. It becomes the ultimate sacrifice of time to build something just to remove it, to make it part of your design. And I strongly encourage you, just try and stick with it. Try and if you've got an idea or a plan for your tree, give it time to fulfill. Give it time to reach its potential, because if you don't, then I reckon that you'll become dissatisfied with the tree, or like I said, even worse, something horrible will happen. Righto, we are done, folks. That was a good one. I enjoyed that, especially that talking about patience. That's sort of not only for you guys. A lot of this stuff that I do on the podcast is for me, to put me back in perspective as well, and get me refocused on things and that concept of framing. It's something that I do, but it's with these intensives and with my digging into trying to evolve a bonsai course as far as I've had them. It's all stuff like that I dig into, and it's like, that's a great idea. I should let the world know about that and talk about it. It's not something you need to spend an hour on, but it's something that sort of, it's a concept in design that I think is really useful with us with our bonsai. And we've had another thing too before I wrap up the podcast is, we've had, you look around Australia, and I know this podcast goes everywhere, but the weather extremes are starting to peak. Here we're coming into the last month of spring, so we've still got another 2-3 weeks of so-called spring to arrive. And I look around the country in the southern states, which really summer for us on average is 35 degrees plus. We're still in late-ish spring, mid to late spring, and places that aren't far from here are hitting 40s, and it's insane. And I think that this summer extremes that we're going to get, I'm using this change in forecast. Like yesterday for me, we had, I was in the car driving and it said it was 36 degrees or something like that. And today we've had a cool change come through, and I've got to put on a bloody wind cheater and pants again because it's cool. It's down to high teens, low 20s the very next day. So we're getting these really extremes of fluctuating temperature. It's building up so hot over Central Australia, and then all it takes is a bit of a front to come through and push that hot air one way or the other, whether it's to the west, to the east, to the south, whatever it is, and we get cooked. It doesn't matter where you are. It can hit really, really rapidly. And I'm using it as a really stark reminder, and I encourage you too. And I was just talking about this in a workshop with some people saying, these extremes, some people are already talking about getting cooked leaves on trees and stuff like that. And it's like, well, this is just the start. So you need to factor in your care regime now. Like, get onto it. Start using this as a reminder. Like, this is going to be intense. Have I got my shade structures ready to go? Have I got my watering system in place? Have I got my emergency? If something goes drastically wrong, what am I going to do with my trees? Where are they going to go? How am I going to manage them? If you can't be home during the day between core work hours, whatever it is, during the extreme heat of days, what are you going to do? because it's no good saying, shit, I know it's going to be 40 to 45 degrees for about a week, but I can't be here because of whatever. You need to make plans for it now, whether it's watering systems, as I've talked about, or whether it's, someone to come in and do things. Start the conversation now in your own head to make sure that your trees are going to be able to get through this next period. It's we're coming up to the biggest test. Summer is, I have no doubt, the biggest test on you and your care for your bonsai, how you've looked after them. Have you done the right thing? Have you repotted them in a good solid mix? Have you given them the best opportunity to grow the strongest root system they can get? Have you got it where that tree is now flourishing and the leaves are starting to harden off? Have you fed them well? Are they strong? Are they healthy? Are they, are they vigorous? Are they looking good, or are they limp? Are they looking like they're struggling now? We get a day mid 20s and you start getting burnt leaves. It's like, hang on a minute, that shouldn't be doing that. What's going wrong? Did it miss repotting? If it did, start putting in place plans for it now to make sure that you can get through these periods, because I'd guarantee I'd bet my left leg that, this summer's going to be hot. They're all bloody hot. Summer's hideous no matter what, no matter which way you look at it. The trees get through the other end of summer, head towards autumn, and breathe a sigh of relief and go, oh, thank God that's over. Every year it's the same. So don't just put your head in the sand and go, yeah, no, it's all good. It's like, okay, well, plan for the worst and hope for the best. That's the way that you should be doing it. Get everything in place now, that if we do suddenly look at it and go, you know what, instead of being 3 or 4 days of mid 40 degrees, it's, in 3 weeks of mid 40s. How are you going to get through that period? How are you going to make sure your trees don't end up cooked at the other end of it? And, sticking your head in the sand is not the way to go. So anyway, thank you always for listening in and sticking around to this point in the podcast. There are plenty more to come for the year, so stick around. Thank you very much to the subscribers. I love you all. It really means a lot to me. Thank you for listening, and make sure that you are on the front foot. As I said, make sure that you're ready to go, and reach out if you need help. Hey, there's always me at the other end. Catch me through the socials, on email scott@bonsaimatsu.com. I am 100% here for you guys and gals, because I love you. You mean so much to me. The bonsai community is brilliant. It's really, really, really reassuring, and I'm looking forward to 2024. There's a lot I've got planned travelling wise, and seeing and meeting a hell of a lot of different people around country, and going to hopefully New Zealand too, which would be great. Get across the ditch and catch up with our brothers from another mother, and make sure that the bonsai world gets stronger and stronger every single day. And that's how I feel with this podcast. I feel like this podcast is a good dose of fertilizer for us all, that encourages us to grow and become the best possible bonsai custodians we can be. So make sure you give your trees a cuddle for me. Spend as much time with them as you possibly can. There's never, bonsai time is not bad time ever. So until next time, happy bonsai.